Hello viewers and welcome to Novus Talks with me, your host Novus Corvus. And once again I am without proper lighting, so I apologize. Camera's in a different position, that's why the audio sounds maybe a bit more funny than usual. Just bear with me for the time being. We'll try and have things back to normal as soon as possible, but in the meantime this is all I got for you, I'm afraid, so my apologies about that. But yeah, as you could tell from the title, even though I'm a couple of months late, it is time to review Bayonetta 3. This came out in October. Why am I talking about it now and not in October? Because, well, as I explained before, I was playing Nier Automata for the last 4 months, and then I was busy working over the Christmas period. I didn't get around to it, lack of motivation, things of that nature. But now that I'm making videos again, let's talk about Bayonetta 3, because I've wanted to talk about this game. I've wanted to do a review. But at first I was thinking, okay, let me try and beat the game multiple times, replay it, do a lot of the challenges, and see if my opinion changes. But I kind of put this to bed after I played it the first time, so I figured, you know what, I might as well just go ahead and do it. So Bayonetta 3, I first heard of this game 2018, right? Is when I got a Switch. It was when I first started properly getting into Nintendo, watching all the news videos and different Nintendo YouTubers talking about games and following the social media pages and all that. And, you know, across Nintendo's pages, across the Game Awards, across E3, the one thing I kept seeing was a game called Bayonetta 3. Everyone was asking for this game. I'd never heard of it. And then I heard that Bayonetta 1 and 2 were on Switch. I decided to check them out because they'd just recently been ported. And those two games, specifically Bayonetta 2, became my favorite games ever. Bayonetta 2 is one of my favorite games. It's not my favorite, but it's one of my favorites. Definitely in the top 10. I love that game to death. It was so much fun. There was a lot of adrenaline. You know, the fights were intense, and the set pieces were dramatic and over the top. And obviously, you'd like the sexual and explicit elements. The humor was really good. The characters were all kind of dorky and funny in the right ways. It was just campy fun. It was great entertainment, and it was just chaos, carnage, and just destruction in all the best ways possible. It was a lot of fun. So obviously, because I love that game, I was very excited for Bayonetta 3. I was on the hype train for years, and as you know, we never got info over the last 5 years. There was complete silence. I made I didn't make a load of videos, but I made quite a few videos talking about the game, coming up to different E3s, Nintendo Directs, and we just never saw it until last September. We finally got our trailer, and then last July we got another one, and then it's out in October. So it's only fitting that, because my journey with the Switch and kind of with Nintendo as a whole in recent years as an adult started with Bayonetta, it's only fitting that I review this game, Bayonetta 3. So, was it worth the wait? First of all, voice actor controversy aside, we're not going to talk about that. I made a bunch of videos on that. We know what the situation was there, so I'm not really going to bring that up here. Just about the game itself. The first thing that surprised me when I booted up the game was, visuals aside, you had the really cool introduction sequence that was really dramatic, and the music was really intense and emotional. It was very different from the intros to Bayonetta 1 and 2. But after that, you get your typical in the moment, in the city kind of banter with Enzo and Bayo, and Rodon shows up as well. And then quickly, carnage ensues, and you're doing that whole cruise ship sequence. And one thing immediately hit me when I was playing that. The combos, the controls, and Bayonetta's moveset was very different. To my knowledge, even though I only played them in January or February, it's kind of gone out of my mind, but I do think Bayonetta 1 and 2 had a similar moveset, right? That's not just my mind playing tricks on me. Those games controlled rather similarly, in the sense that she had a lot of the same combos, right? Because with Bayonetta 3, I found I struggled to adapt to the controls at first. I was having trouble figuring out what's replaced the moves I've learned, because it is a bit of a different moveset. That took some getting used to. The controls, the buttons were tweaked a bit as well, but eventually I was able to customize it to be a bit more suitable to my liking, so that was fine. And then what I noticed is that they really kept building up the set pieces. Way more than Bayonetta 2. Bayonetta 2's intro was chaotic and stuff, but you were able to follow along for the most part. With Bayonetta 3's intro, I was so chaotic. There was so much. The sense was like, let's make this as big as possible. Just make it as disruptive and throw everything in there. Doesn't have to make sense. And literally, because like there's stuff in that intro that never gets explained, like the Kraken that gets summoned, and you never find out who summoned that. That just goes completely unanswered for some reason. And there's callbacks to Bayonetta 1 and 2 in there, and that happens, that goes on. Then you get into the meat of the game after that, and you're thrown onto Thule. And I was shocked because suddenly the game was open world. I was not expecting this. Trailers seemed a bit more open, but I didn't expect open world. It's not a full open world, it's still pretty linear, but there's elements of an open world. And that's because apparently the game was supposed to be fully open world, but they changed it halfway through development. That's why it took so long. But you notice it, because you can see the portals in the sky that lead to different universes. And in any other open world game, you would be able to jump into those portals and go wherever. And I feel like that's what the original plan was, but that's not at all what happens in the game, so that was kind of strange. Wasn't a fan of that. I'm used to Bayonetta being linear, so to be doing this open world thing, it's unnecessary. I'm not a fan of open world games in general, so that was kind of unappealing to me. But you jump in and you're going around New York, and suddenly the ugliness of the graphics really hits you. It just looks, in that first level in New York, or not New York, sorry, I think it's Tokyo, my bad, Tokyo, it just looks so unbelievably ugly. And there's no excuse for it. Bayonetta 2 was on the Wii U, and it looks so much better. Granted, there's a lot more complexity to Bayonetta 3, so I'm sure that's a big part of it. But God, you really notice it. And it's not like one of those things where you can overlook it and move on. Like, it really distracts from the game. But I found myself going through the first few missions, and I was bored, shockingly. I couldn't place my finger on it at first, but for some reason I was bored playing a Bayonetta game. And that just boils down to there's no real substance here. You know, the first two games, especially Bayonetta 2, you know, they had a load of set pieces and drama and absolute chaos, right? But the gameplay backed it up. Everything was culminating in a satisfying payoff. With Bayonetta, and those moments were few and scattered between. It was a few boss fights now and again. Bayonetta 3 just does that all of the time. Like, every second moment is some intense set piece, and it's big for the sake of being big. It doesn't feel satisfying because it's not unique, because every second moment of the game is doing this. So when everything's big, there's no moment to step back and appreciate it. The substance is lacking because the gameplay as a result doesn't feel as fun. There's a weird Spider-Man kind of sequence where you're flying around as Phantasmania, which is kind of cool, but it's also frustrating because you get stuck in the environment and you can't really see where you're going, and that gets frustrating after a while. And that brings me to a big problem I had with this game in relation to the gameplay. The camera. Jesus Christ, the camera is really bad in this. The homunculi are so big, a lot of them. The camera can't keep track of them. They literally end up invisible. You can't see where you're attacking, especially if they're fast-moving enemies. Or in the case that I just mentioned, where you're like doing platforming sections around the environment, especially on Demon, you can't see stuff. You don't know where you're going. The camera is stuck in the environment, and it makes it very frustrating. Then you have the lock-on feature, which was another thing that made or break the game. Because the first two games had a great lock-on feature. Bayonetta 3's felt very inconsistent, and I felt like I had no control over it. It just threw me off. I stopped using it because I would lock on and sometimes would unlock, and I couldn't figure out why. Didn't really make sense. I still don't know what's up with that. They've recently released a patch to fix the camera issues. I don't know how much of a difference that's made, if that's fixed a lock-on. I haven't played the game since, but they have taken notice of that at least. That aside, you go into the main gameplay loop of going into a different universe, meeting that Bayonetta. She dies, moving on to the next one. You don't get to meet these characters or properly do anything with them. So not only is the multiverse concept in this game just eye-rolling at first because it doesn't need to be here, but it feels even more pointless because you're seeing these characters just to watch them die. They're not characters. They're just, oh, hey, look, it's Bayonetta, and we wanted to kill Bayonetta off. Let's do it in this weird, funky way, and you can get their weapon. Which is weird because the first one you meet, you get to play as, but you don't get to play as the other Bayonettas. I suspect that was a feature that was cut, or maybe they just realized since you get their weapons anyway, it's pointless. I don't know, but that was a strange thing. Meeting all the Bayonettas, it just feels pointless because they don't add anything, they just exist. And their presence means nothing in the grand scheme of things. You don't learn anything about them. And a big feature of this game, obviously, she's on the back of the box, she was heavily in the trailers, it's Viola. She has a lot of segments, well, I say a lot of segments, it's about 3 or 4 segments that are mandatory to play as. She is awful to play as. She is genuinely fucking awful to play as. I cannot stand her. Yeah, I made comments before about how she's similar to Raiden from Metal Gear in terms of how she plays. That's partially true. It's similar, but it's worse because her parry just barely works. She's very slow and awkward, and her style does not fit with what these enemies were designed for. The homunculi were designed around Bayonetta's moveset and her witch time and how that works, not around how this sword fighting witch works. So it just feels really awkward. It was a drag to play as her. I liked being able to summon Cheshire at any time, but and especially compared to like Bayonetta's demons, because that's a huge part of the game is summoning the demons and Masquerade and Slave. I hated that. Summoning demons as Bayonetta, it really slows down the combat. You're just playing as giant demons that are slow and they're hitting very slow, and yeah, they're doing damage, but like Bayonetta's combat is supposed to be fast and snappy. I'm supposed to be able to rack up as many combos as possible, and it's annoying when I'm just doing big heavy demons, and some of them are fun, sure. Madama Butterfly, the train, those ones are cool, but other than that, it's just, a lot of them are slow, they're not fun, and I barely use them because they were just annoying. I only use them for the big enemies that I couldn't really see, and even then the demons can still get like knocked out, so it just becomes a nuisance to use anyway. Cheshire, you know, you don't control him, you can still play as Viola at the same time, so that was kind of better. I like that, but it was still kind of cumbersome at the best of times. So, hated that. And then Jean. Oh, goodness God. Jean has sections that are just 2D. Not only are they 2D, they're limited. They're time limited to like 2 minutes. She attacks very weakly, and she can die in like 2 hits. Why? These sections are obnoxious. They almost make you want to stop playing the game because they're just so poorly designed. They're not fun. Like, why is Jean, a character who's on par with Bayonetta, being relegated to this weaker, annoying role? I should be able to play as her in the main game, and I know you can when you beat the game, but not when you beat the game. During the main game, instead of doing all this nonsense side 2D stuff, like, give me Jean in proper combat where she's doing combos and crazy moves. I don't want to be doing this sneaking around stuff. It's not fun. It's obnoxious. I hated it with a passion, and it just made Jean as a character feel lesser because she was relegated to that while Viola was getting this focus. And then going back into the story then, Luca, you know, he was a cool little dorky character in the first one, and now he's a werewolf or a fairy or something. I don't know. The game doesn't explain it. The game doesn't explain anything, actually. Why did they do this? Why did they think that was a good idea? It's so stupid. He's supposed to be a goofy character. He's not supposed to be taken seriously. So when you take him seriously, it just feels wrong and out of place. And then, obviously, from the very beginning of the game, you know what the twist is going to be. So it's not really a plot twist as much, since it's pretty damn obvious. But even still, when it finally came round, I absolutely cringed at Viola being their daughter. Like, okay, on the one hand, I'm glad Bayonetta and Luca got together because that was it was hinted at in the first game. Obviously, Luca was very into her, and she gained respect for him at the end, but then Bayonetta 2 kind of just made them friends, and they kind of skipped over that. So I'm glad they got together, but it's the way the game put them together that just doesn't work, and it feels bad. Because now they're just like, oh, we were destined to be in love forever, and it's like fate that brought us together. It's like, it just feels so contrary to what Bayonetta 2 did. It doesn't feel like you naturally fell in love. It just feels forced. And that's why it doesn't work, especially with Viola. Speaking characterization, Bayonetta, she's sassy and she's sexy, right? Especially in the past games. But she's also caring underneath that. Like, you might remember how she talks to Cereza, how she talks to Luca. Here she's just a complete asshole. She's giggling and laughing while billions are dying all around her, and she's just being a bitch to Viola at times, and it's just, she feels very out of character. Which is made worse by the fact that her being one of a many variants just makes her less unique, less special. The whole point of the first two games, oh, you're one of a kind. Well, that's meaningless now because no, she's not. Story side, the kaiju battles again, they get a big focus, and you have these boss segments where you're playing as like upgraded versions of demons. Kind of cool, but at the same time, you can't appreciate them because the entire game is like that. So they just become repetitive and boring because the whole game is on that scale. Story then doesn't make any sense. There's all this stuff about like Adam and Eve that's like never explained. You just become completely lost because the game doesn't explain anything that's happened. Things just happen for the sake of happening, and it's not fun. It just makes the experience frustrating. And then you get to the end, and I will say the second last mission, I think it is. It's when you first arrive in the Alphaverse. That was the only bit of the game I genuinely loved. You're fighting that giant ship homunculi thing as Madame Butterfly. And maybe it's because you're in the sky, and it's the combination of being in the sky with this abstract-looking enemy, but it felt very much like the first two Bayonetta games, especially Bayonetta 2. So that's why I really liked that. If the rest of the game was like that, it would have been awesome, but no. So after that, Jean just gets unceremoniously killed off, as if it wasn't bad enough that the game already dumbed her down into being just a side character. Now she's killed off, which makes the events of Bayonetta 2 pointless. Then you get the final battle, and okay, the final boss, I will say, even though Singularity is like a terrible villain and not even really a character, as a boss fight, that final boss is amazing. It is incredible. I love that you get to go into space. There's like 5 or 6 or 7 phases to this dude. I love that. Going into space, fighting the different phases, like that was awesome. I love that. But then it tries to bring in all the different like multiverse variants, and it just gets annoying. And then obviously the fight ends and Bayonetta dies. Our Bayonetta dies. And then Luca dies as well. And it's like, it's sad at first because then you get this dance sequence in the credits and you're like, okay, like this feels like the conclusion of a trilogy. This is Bayonetta's story is over. And I will admit, I cried to that. That was emotional. But then all of that goodwill is undone immediately after by a post-credit scene, and suddenly like Bayonetta is back and she's evil, and you're fighting the Kraken as Viola, but then evil Bayonetta is gone, and now Viola takes Luca's scarf and Bayonetta's glasses and calls herself Bayonetta. And then the game ends with a tease to be continued in the next generation. So Bayonetta 4 is not going to be a Bayonetta game, it's going to be a Viola game. That was one of the worst endings in any game I've ever seen. That is a Rise of Skywalker type thing there. Because having Viola become Bayonetta is not only completely stupid, it undermines everything Bayonetta does. So Bayonetta gets her achievements taken away from her, her uniqueness by just being one of many in the multiverse taken away, and then obviously her identity by the end of the game taken away, because now anyone can be Bayonetta or some stupid shit. That was really furious. Like, that's the one thing that made me never want to touch the game again. Most people will say, oh, you don't play these games for the story is negligible. In a lot of cases that can be true. Take Astral Chain, excellent game, terrible writing, but you can ignore the writing because the rest of the game is good. It exists independent of the writing. Same with Metroid Dread. Writing, not great. The game itself, phenomenal. But the game is so intrinsically connected with the story. The story enforces the words. Like, yeah, I'm playing as Viola because the story demands I play as Viola. And there's this confusion as well because variants from Bayonetta 1 and 2 show up at the end, and some people think that means Bayonetta 1 and 2 are not the same character, and it's actually 2 different variants, and Bayonetta 3 is actually Cereza from the first game, even though Bayonetta Origins, the trailer suggested that Cereza from the first game is actually Viola's mother who dies at the start of Bayonetta 3. If all of that sounds completely confusing, It fucking well is. It doesn't make any sense. The whole thing is botched up. Bayonetta was one of my favorite series. I loved it to death, but Bayonetta 3 is one of those games where it's stooped so low that it's actually ruined the franchise as a whole. Like, I'm not that excited for the future of this franchise anymore, I have to say. Like, it's weird because I wouldn't say Bayonetta 3 is a bad game, but like at the same time, there's really bad elements in it. So it's difficult to describe, but certainly the story and the writing, and it's really the writing and the story more than anything. Like, the gameplay is fun in parts, but it's mostly just frustrating. Like, it just really undermines the series. It ruins the events of the past two games, because Bayonetta 1 and 2 are clearly one timeline and it's a loop. Bayonetta 3 tries to like change that, but that's bullshit. So it's retconning the first two games, and it's also making sure that Bayonetta 4, Bayonetta 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however many he wants to do, they're all just going to be completely different. They're going in different directions, and it seems like we're going more in a fairy tale direction now. This series just completely changed. Bayonetta 3 really changed the series into something completely unrecognizable and different. And I get that. Look, I get wanting to change things up and not want to be the same. But this is not how you do it. You don't completely change the characters and the world and the context of everything. That's how you bury the series. And I know it's kind of a cliche now, right? You had... Raiden was introduced in Metal Gear Solid 2. No one liked him then. You were forced to play as him. People loved him in Metal Gear Solid 4. Then he got his own game in Revengeance, and he's everyone's favorite character now. Virgil in Devil May Cry. Everyone hated him at first. Come Devil May Cry 5, everyone loves him again. So sure, you could argue everyone hates Viola, but history dictates that, like, in Bayonetta 4 or 5, everyone's going to love her. And maybe they completely change her moveset, and as she grows as a witch, she becomes fun to play as. Quite possibly, but this game really took the wind out of the series to the point that, like, I don't even know if I want Bayonetta 4. Like, to be honest with you, I would have been happy if this was cancelled. It would have been probably better for the series if it was cancelled, because this does so much damage to the characters and the brand as a whole. Platinum's flagship franchise, Bayonetta, and they just... I know, they turn into something it's not. And Bayonetta Origins, on the one hand, cool, it's awesome, I'm excited for it. I was shocked when it was announced. But you're making it kid-friendly. Bayonetta 3 already had very little sexual elements. Angel mode aside, the sexuality is not really there. Now you have this kids game with Bayonetta Origins. It feels like the series is being dumbed down into something it's not supposed to be. Because they said Bayonetta 3 was going to be the most explicit game, and then it's not. There's almost nothing there. Even when she's dancing, it's different. Her demon chants are like the same. It's the same chant for everything. They changed that. You know, she used to have a unique chant for every demon. Now it's all the same one. Damage to the series. It's to the point, like, we don't know who the protagonist is, if it's the same protagonist all the time, or if it's different. And if it's different, it makes the credits feel weird, because it feels like it's trying to close the trilogy of this character's story, which doesn't make sense if it's a different variant of the character in every game. So, yeah. My thoughts on Bayonetta 3 overall, it wasn't worth the wait in the end. It has its moments, but there's no replayability. The open world, the witch trials and stuff, the gameplay has a lot of funky elements that kind of ruin it and make it frustrating. The story is so bad and so intricate. It's so vital and tied into the gameplay that you can't just ignore it, because the gameplay is the way it is because of the story. It's not like you can just ignore the story like you can with the other games. It's vital to why things are the way they are. And so, as a result of that, it loses a lot of its charm. I can't believe I'm saying this. It is a shame, because Bayonetta 3 was one of my top 3 most anticipated games. But look, at the end of the day, it's in the past now. We have Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon to look forward to, and then Bayonetta 4 will probably come out in another 8 years, and presumably fairies will be the villains there, and I don't know. I know this series seems like it's going a complete direction that no one expected, but I don't know. I'll probably still buy it and play it and support it, especially because it's Platinum and I love them, but they really missed the mark here and they really screwed the series over in terms of its potential. But who knows? Maybe Bayonetta 4 rectifies it. Kamiya was already talking about retconning the ending of Bayonetta 3, so who knows? But yeah, those are my thoughts on Bayonetta 3. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. How did you feel about Bayonetta 3? Was it worth the 5-year wait to you? Did you play it? What did you think of the game? Did you like the story? Did you hate it? What did you think of the gameplay and the weird elements? What do you think of Viola? I want to hear everything you have to say down in the comment section below. And yeah, with that all said, thank you all for watching and please subscribe. Novus Goves out.